Hey, and welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever really thought about why some languages stick around for centuries while others just disappear in a generation or two? Today, we're digging into the science behind language survival. We're going to trace the whole story of this field, from its earliest days right up to the messy, complicated challenges of our globalized world. So let's dive in.
So, this is it. This is the big question at the heart of everything. It's what gets researchers so fascinated with the delicate dance that happens when different cultures and languages meet. I mean, think about it. Why does one community hold on so tight to its mother tongue while another just lets it go? To figure that out, we have to start with the absolute basics.
Okay, so that brings us to our first stop, a tale of two tongues. Before we can get into the why, we need to get a really clear picture of what is actually happening on the ground. When a minority language runs into a dominant one, it turns out there are really only two ways the story can end. On one side, you have language maintenance. Pretty straightforward, right? That's when a community keeps its heritage language going, passing it down through the generations. And then you've got the flip side, language shift. That's the exact opposite. It's that slow process where a community gradually switches over to the more dominant language. Now, the most important word here is gradual. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. Language shift is a slow burn. It kind of retreats bit by bit from different parts of your life, what researchers call spheres of usage. First, it might disappear from work or school, then maybe you stop using it with your friends, and finally, it's not even spoken at home anymore. And that's when it's really in trouble. Okay, so we know what happens, but how do we go from just noticing this to actually studying it like a science? Well, that takes us to section 2, and the pioneers, the founding fathers, who really put this field on the map. Way before this was even a formal field of study, the first researchers were absolutely fascinated by these things called Sprachinseln. It's German for linguistic islands, and it's a perfect name for it. Think about a community of German speakers in the middle of Texas, or Welsh speakers way down in Patagonia. They were literally trying to preserve their language like an island in a huge sea of another language. You could say these little pockets were the very first laboratories for this kind of research. And as you can see here, things really started to formalize in the 20th century. Back in the 20s, a guy named Heinz Kloss kind of got the ball rolling, but the real momentum picked up after World War II. In the 50s, Einar Hagen and Oriol Weinreich laid some critical groundwork, but it was in the 1960s that Joshua Fishman came along and really cemented it all. He's the one who made it a real established part of sociolinguistics. And this is Fishman's simple but absolutely genius question. Who speaks what language to whom and when? It sounds so basic, but it's incredibly powerful. This became the North Star for all the research that came after. To understand why a language survives or dies, you have to get down in the weeds and figure out exactly who is using it, who they're talking to, and in what specific situations. It's the key that unlocks the whole mystery. So to answer that big question, Fishman came up with this brilliant little chart. He smashed two ideas together. Bilingualism, do people speak two languages, and this thing called diglossia. Now, diglossia is just a fancy word for a simple idea. His big insight was this. For two languages to live together happily, they can't be competing for the same jobs. Maybe you speak Spanish at home, but English at work. That's stable. Now, pay attention to that bottom left box. When a community speaks both languages, but there's no diglossia, when both languages are trying to do the same job, that's when things get unstable. That's the tipping point where language shift usually kicks in. Okay, so we've got the history, we've got Fishman's big idea, but how do you actually do this research? Out in the real world. This brings us to section 3, the researcher's toolkit. We're going to look at how they actually study these changes while they're happening. Well, researchers basically have a 3-part toolkit. First, they zoom way out for the big picture, using massive data sets from things like a national census. That's the sociology of language. Then they zoom in on what's going on inside our heads, our attitudes, our identities. That's social psychology. And finally, they do a deep dive. This is ethnography, where they go live in a community, talk to people, and just observe. That's where you get the really rich stories. And by using all these methods, the pioneers, guys like Kloss, started to see patterns. They figured out what helps a language survive. For instance, if a group moved a long time ago and settled somewhere kind of isolated and rural, their language had a better shot. It also helps if the language is a core value, something deeply tied to their identity and religion. And this one is huge. Having grandparents in the house. They're like the anchors, keeping the language tied to the family for the next generation.
But, of course, the world has changed a lot. The world Clausen and Fishman were looking at, well, that's not our world anymore. And that takes us to our final section, the new frontier, and how globalization and technology are totally rewriting the rulebook. And this quote right here, it just nails the problem we're facing now. We're not just talking about those isolated language islands anymore. It's so much more complicated. People move constantly, families are scattered across the globe, and we're all connected instantly. The old models just don't always fit these new realities. Just take a look at a modern family, like the Tran family here. They started in Vietnam, moved to France, and now have family in Sweden. I mean, look at that list. People are juggling French, Vietnamese, English, Arabic, Swedish. This isn't a simple one versus one situation anymore. This kind of complex, messy, awesome multilingualism, that's the new normal. And then there's the internet, which is, let's be honest, a total game changer. Suddenly, you have an instant connection back to your language's heartland, no matter where you are in the world. Take Dutch Australians, for example. Historically, their community wasn't great at keeping the language, but now they're online all the time, browsing Dutch websites, streaming Dutch shows, video calling relatives. The internet has basically built them a virtual home for their language. Which brings us to the big final question, and it's a tricky one. On one hand, this incredible technology could be the savior for thousands of languages, connecting people like never before. But on the other hand, do all these global platforms just end up pushing a few dominant languages, like English? The very same tool that could save a language might also be the thing that pushes it aside. So are we building a more diverse world of languages or a more uniform one? What do you think is going to happen?